Hello, my name's Nick Gross. In our previous lesson, I taught you guys how to play bar chords. And we've been working on playing in key, mostly in the key of C and the key of G. But I've also been trying to give you guys the tools to play in any key and just use those keys as an example. Okay, so what we're gonna do is make a bass line today. Now, before I taught you guys an octave, okay? So when you're playing a chord, a bar chord, like let's say you're playing this G chord, right? Your E string and D string have octaves on them. And when you're playing a C chord, your A string and G string are an octave, right? The order of a chord of a bar chord is 1, 5, 3, or 1, 5, 1, 3. So it's the first note of the scale, the first note, fifth note, first note, third note. And that's pertaining relatively to the chord. So if it's G, then the first note is G, the fifth note is gonna be D, and then again there's the first note, and that's our octave of the G, so it's the same note, and then our third is gonna be B. Okay, so what we're gonna do is craft a bass line around the 1-4-5 chord progression of C major, or of the key of C. So our chords are C, F, and G, and we're using bar chords for this. So what we're gonna do is, so bass lines, generally speaking, are gonna be from the root to the fifth. And so since we have the second note in our scale, right, our fifth, or the second note in our chord downward, right, on the D string we have our fifth, and we know it's G. Well, we don't know, but now you know, it's G. So the fifth of the C chord is G. Now, we know that G is also right here, the octave, as I was speaking of a moment ago. So what we can do is we're gonna go down, down, down. So it's 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. And instead of using this bass note, or this note, the G, the higher pitched G, we're gonna use this deeper G because it's a bass line and we want it to sound deep. So we're gonna go, and how I'm doing that is just holding down the C chord, and we're letting the pinky hold the chord, and then the pointer finger is moving C, G, C, G, okay? Now that's only gonna be applicable for chords on the A string, because when we're on the E string, we can't go upwards. So C chord, and then we're gonna go to our F chord, and it's just holding down the F chord, and you're gonna do the bass notes 1, 5, 1, 5. So it's E string, A string, E string, A string. When I say 5, I'm saying the fifth. Before we talked about this, but a chord is composed of the root note, which is the first, and then a fifth and a third. So when we're doing a G chord, it's G, B, D, right? But if we do this G chord, it's gonna be G, D, G, B, okay? So we have our third as the melody note versus in this G chord, the melody note would be the octave unless we decided to only strum up to a certain string. We'll talk about that in a moment. Okay, so we're crafting a bass line here. And so what we have to do is decide what chord we want to go to from C. So what we're going to do is just go 1, 4, 5. So C, F, G. So now to make a good bass line, what we're going to need to do is figure out which notes are in the scale, okay, that revolve around the base of our chords. So what we're going to do is go C, B, A, G, F, E. And we can go, okay, C, yeah. Those are the only notes that we're going to use for our bass line, other than our fifths. Right, so yeah, so we're just gonna use D, C, B, A, G, G, F, E. Okay. So what we're gonna do is from our C, we're just gonna let that scale. Just do the scale from the C to the G. Okay. Now, the reason that we're not doing it, we could do it that way actually, there's no problem with that. But right now, what we're aiming for is to end on the note next to, or the note in our scale that's one away from our chord. So what we're gonna do is go from the C, B, A, G, and then F chord. And then what we can do is, okay, well the F chord is cramped up here, so we don't really have many notes. We have F, E, and G. And those are the only ones we can play. So what we're gonna say is, oh well, now we have to end on the G, right? We can't just go, well, actually, we could, but in this situation, I want to end on the G, so I'm gonna go. And then we go, okay, we need to make a bass line from our G to our C, or from our G to our B, since it's next to the C. And I want to go to the B instead of the C, just so it doesn't sound, just so there's a little bit of variation, we went, so what we're gonna do is go 2 plucks of the G, and then, so G, G, A, B, C. And what we could do is if we decided, oh, well, we want to go C, G, F instead. Or, in a similar scenario, what we could do is, okay, well, we were aiming for the F and we resolved on the G, or we ended on the G. So what we could do is go, okay, well, I want to end on the A, for the G, so we could go. So we're gonna pluck the C twice. So C, C, B, A. And so then we can use that same bass line that I was just talking about from the G to the C, but we can, instead of having it be G, G, A, B, we can go C, G, A, B if we're staying on that C chord, right? And it's ideally the same thing. Sorry, I'm kind of getting a little poop-brained here right now. So what we have right now is we're building this bass line, right? And it's right. So our last part of the bass line is from the C back to the C, because we started on the C and we ended on the C. So our bass line is from C to C, essentially. And the reason that works is because G is the fifth of the C. Our bass line is flowing between C and G, so it works perfectly. If we wanted to do a different bass line, we could use any of the fifths from the first to the fifth of any of these notes. Instead of, we could go, or, you know, or, right. I'm not trying to teach you guys a specific bass line. I'm trying to teach you guys how to make your own bass line. So, characteristically, our bass line is either going to flow from a first to a fifth, first, fifth, or it's going to flow in order of the scale. You know, just the scale there. And it might look like I'm playing a G major scale, but all of the notes, the first three notes of the G major scale are the same as the C major, are in the C major scale. So if I were to, that's upwards, but if I were to go downwards, I would go, right. I can't work my way all the way down to the C, so it ends at the E. We're restricted by lack of notes beyond the lowest pitch note of the guitar. But in other situations, in other keys, we could do that. All right. So when you build your own bass line, what you're gonna do is just start out, you have your bass chord, right? The first chord of your scale, and you're, and you're gonna decide how you want that's your skeleton, right? You have the skeleton is the chord and the bass there, right? And then you're adding like skin and hair and all that. The skin and hair is that's your skin and hair and your eyeballs, organs, etc. Right? That's the flesh. That's the meat. So it's going to be based around the movement here. Here's the skeleton. And then there's a little meat there. You know, I know this is a bad analogy, but none of my analogies are good. So another way to put it would be, this is your main part, right? Okay, but the things that connect your main part together, right? Your tendons, organs, skin, whatever the heck you want to call it. The thing that connects the bass together, or not the bass, but the your main thing here, the thing that connects this all together hear that? It really strings everything together, you know, and you don't have to walk from every chord to every chord. You could just like that. I'm just showing you how to build your own bass lines, right? It's usually going to be movement between the first and fifth, like that, and then in the order of the scale. But you can also, as you've seen in this bass line, it's first, fifth. It's, you can go from your first to your fifth, and then walk the bass line from your fifth to whichever note you're aiming for. So let's say you want to go from the F to the C. Well, C is the fifth of F, so you could go. So. Yeah. Right. You could just go. Right. It's just all about linking chords together and really emphasizing the root and the fifth of whichever chord you're playing on. Now, another thing to take into consideration is you can add changes in rhythm, anything like that. So you could go. Right, like that, and that works fine. Or you could keep your bass line completely intact, and you could go. Add more strums in between your bass lines, right? There's nothing going on between your bass line, so you could go. You could add more strums in between your bass line, etc. A good rule of thumb, though, is to not do more than 3 strums, because you have 1, 2, 3, 4. See, it's 1, 1. Well, if we did it 1 and 2 and 1 and 2, and there would be no room. So that's why we do it 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and. So you could ideally do 1, 2, and a 2, 2, 1, 2, and a 3, 2, and a 1, 2. But I wouldn't do more than 3. So like 1 and a 2 and a 1 and a 2, or a 1 triplet 2 triplet 1 triplet 2 triplet 1 triplet 2 triplet. But that would be more of a waltz feel. So you can do up to 4. Just don't go beyond that, you know. 4 is really pushing it. You know, I like to do kind of a 1, 2, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, or 1, 2, and 3, 4, and 1, 2, and 3, 4, and hear that? So what I'm doing is 1 down, up, 2 down, up, or up, down, up. Okay, now another thing to keep in mind is, I haven't taught you guys this yet. It's pretty simple, but also important. So when we're playing different chord voicings, hear that? I'm only strumming up to the C, but if I strum all the way up to the E, there's a difference. So if I strum up to the C, hear that? The C rings out. The C is our melody note of the chord. If I go up to the E, then the E is the melody note of our chord. Okay, but if I take this chord, if I do that chord, then E becomes the melody note of our C chord there. If I do a G chord like I just did, then our melody note becomes G, just like here. But what I can do is I can get a D if I only strum up to the B string. Right, so that becomes the melody note. Now that's useful in some situations, like for instance, in jazz, something that I've learned is a chord melody, right? You figure out your melody, okay? You figure out your melody, and then you find the chords of the song, and you arrange the chords in a way that you can play the melody while playing the chords. So something like that. Now that's pretty advanced, but I'm just trying to explain to you guys that it's important which note you strum up to in a lot of different situations. And there are even cases where, like our alternating bass line, we have an alternating melody where it would be like, I don't know if that's easy to hear or not, but essentially the point of that is that you have just as much control over as you do with how far up you strum in the melody there. It's just more work to get the melody. The bass, it's awesome because it's just that one finger doing the work. But when you're trying to do a melody, you have to do all sorts of stuff. You have to figure out where the chord can be played to get the melody notes that you want. And then you need to find a chord voicing. You need to find a chord voicing where you can access that melody note. Then you have to strum only up to the melody note. And then sometimes you're going to need a finger free to add other, to really get your melody perfect. But ideally, the best way to think about what I'm teaching you today is watch a piano player. Their left hand is doing boom, 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 and that is just your bass. And so that's one hand completely dedicated to the bass. And sometimes they're gonna play chords with it, but that's just the left hand. Now what the right hand is doing is it's playing bigger chords, okay? It's playing all this, it's playing that. It's playing all that, and it's very carefully, like when you watch a piano player, their right hand, the furthest note to the right, Imagine a piano player, they're playing a chord, and then this pinky is hitting the melody note, or whichever note is the furthest to the right on the piano is hitting that melody note. So the right hand is working harder to play the melody and the chord, whereas the left hand, it's doing bass and chords. But the bass and the chords are all in the same place. They can just like dong dong dong, you know, they can just kind of hit the note with a finger, hit the bass note with a finger, hit a part of the chord, but the right hand is matching that. So boom, bing, boom, bing, boom, bing, and then they have the melody to deal with in the right hand as well. So it's kind of it's like a Hydra, you know, it has more than one head, and it can look two ways at the same time, but it all contributes to the same thing, right? If one head of the Hydra kills something, then both heads eat it. Or, you know, they're like, I forget what you call it, when there's like two friends, codependent. They're codependent on each other, right? So each hand of the piano is codependent on the other hand. If you only had one hand, then you'd be missing out on a lot of stuff, right? So when you're playing just chords, that's like playing only one hand of the piano, in my opinion. But when you're doing all sorts of extra stuff thrown in, it's like two hands, it's both hands. So what I'm trying to teach you today is how to add the second hand in, right? If that makes sense. I hope this helped you guys. Like and subscribe if you enjoy my lessons, and have a beautiful day. Thank you.